Welcome back. Today we delve into the dark case of the Boston Strangler, a serial killer who terrorised the city in the early 1960s. Join us as we explore the gruesome details, the manhunt and the controversial capture of the prime suspect. The Boston Strangler was active between 1962 and 1964, responsible for the murders of at least 13 women in the Boston area. The victims were subjected to brutal sexual assaults and strangulation. The fear in the community was palpable, as residents lived in terror of the unknown killer lurking in their midst. Let's take a moment to remember the victims, whose lives were tragically cut short. Names like Mary Sullivan, Anna Sleezers and Sophie Clark are etched in the annals of this chilling case. Anna Sleezers, an elderly immigrant from Latvia, was the first victim of the Boston Strangler, killed on June 14, 1962. Her body was found in her apartment in Boston's Back Bay neighbourhood. She had been strangled with a ligature. Mary Mullen was found dead in her apartment in South Boston on June 28, 1962. Like Sleezers, she had been strangled with a ligature. Mullen was the oldest victim of the Boston Strangler at 85 years old. Nina Nichols was murdered on June 30th, 1962 in her home in Beacon Hill. She had been strangled and a sexual assault had occurred. Nichols was known for her involvement in charity work. Helen Blake, another elderly victim, was killed on June 30th, 1962 in her home in the Gainsborough Street apartment building in Boston. Her murder occurred on the same day as Nina Nichols, and her body was also found with signs of sexual assault. Joan Graff was one of the younger victims at age just 23, murdered on August 19, 1962. She was found in her apartment in Lawrence, Massachusetts. Graff had been strangled with her own stockings. Mary Sullivan was the last recognised victim of the Boston Strangler, killed on January 4th, 1964 in her Boston apartment. She had been strangled with two stockings, and her murder bore similarities to the earlier cases. These are some of the confirmed victims of the Boston Strangler. The victims ranged in age, occupation and background, which added to the fear and confusion surrounding the case. As panic swept through Boston, law enforcement launched a massive manhunt to catch the elusive killer. The Boston Police, the FBI, and even psychic consultants were brought in to aid in the investigation, but for a long time the case remained shrouded in mystery. Finally, in 1965, a breakthrough came when a man named Albert DeSalvo was arrested for a series of sexual assaults. While in custody, DeSalvo confessed to being the Boston Strangler. His detailed knowledge of the crimes sent shockwaves through the city. Albert DeSalvo's confession was chilling. He described in gruesome detail how he had committed the murders. His confession included intimate knowledge only the killer would have known. DeSalvo described how he would strangle his victims using ligatures, often their own clothing or items found at the crime scene. He explained the level of force he applied and how he would maintain control during the attacks. He provided accurate descriptions of the crime scenes, including the layout of the victims' homes, the positions of furniture, and other specific details that only someone present at the scenes would know. He mentioned personal items taken from the crime scenes, such as jewellery, clothing, and other belongings owned by the victims. DeSalvo described in explicit detail the sexual assaults that took place during the murders, including the acts themselves and the post-mortem sexual mutilation of some victims. He claimed that some of the victims made statements or pleas during the attacks, which he recounted in his confessions. DeSalvo provided information about the specific dates and locations of the murders, matching the known timeline of the Boston Strangler killings. These details were so accurate and specific that they convinced many investigators and the public that DeSalvo was indeed the Boston Strangler. But here's where the story takes a mysterious turn. Many remain skeptical about DeSalvo's guilt in all of the Boston Strangler cases. Some believe he may have falsely confessed to gain notoriety or avoid harsher penalties for other crimes. The controversy surrounding his confessions lingers to this day. Albert DeSalvo was convicted of several of the Boston Strangler murders and was sentenced to life in prison. However, the lingering doubts persisted. In a tragic twist, DeSalvo was murdered in prison in 1973, leaving some questions unanswered. As we wrap up our journey into the chilling case of the Boston Strangler, we're left with a haunting mystery. Was Albert DeSalvo truly the infamous serial killer, or did the real Boston Strangler escape justice? The debate rages on, reminding us that even in the darkest corners of true crime, there are still enigmas that defy resolution. Thank you for joining us on this eerie journey behind the yellow tape. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, subscribe and share it with fellow true crime enthusiasts.